My dearest brothers and sisters, this is Hakann speaking. I greet you in peace and love. You probably already know the principle that before you start arguing against someone, or before giving someone unsolicited advice, it's good to first fully understand their perspective. So if someone is doing or advocating for something that just seems completely illogical to you, then it's good to try and understand their perspective better. After all, while obviously some perspectives aren't very useful or accurate, usually there's at least some kind of logic or some valid desire or some kernel of truth behind a perspective that other people hold. And if you can't find a way to take that other person's kernel of truth or that desire on board, then it won't be helpful to just think of their perspective as evil or stupid, and to try to steamroll them in a debate. Even if you win the debate, you will have probably hardened the position of the other person and increased division. What's not helpful to do, yet what happens unfortunately often, is to stereotype the other person's position into an easy-to-attack strawman and then to attack that. Or to label the person themselves negatively, as for example a fascist or communist, attacking the person rather than the argument. Okay, so what's better is to first understand their perspective, and to have a nuanced view of the advantages and disadvantages of their perspective and of your perspective. After all, it's rarely the case that your perspective is 100% perfect and the other person's perspective is completely wrong. I think you probably knew all of this already, at least on some level. Now I would like to add something that may be new information. Ideally, before you argue with someone or give them unsolicited advice, you don't just try to understand their perspective in a nuanced and fair way. You also try to understand what life has been like for them, and how that could perhaps have shaped their views. And you try to understand how your own views have been shaped by the life and experiences you have had. If you don't know the other person, you could share briefly how your life has been and how that has contributed to you having the views you currently hold. And you can ask them how their life has been and how that could perhaps have contributed to the views they currently hold, in their view. After all, many people like to think that they simply hold the objectively correct view and others are wrong. And certainly, people are different, people have different souls and missions here on earth, etc. Yet, it's certainly also true that the life you have had has significantly impacted the views you currently hold. In fact, if you think a certain person is wrong, well, it's possible that if you had led their life, then you would now have their worldview. That's not always the case, but it certainly can be the case. Because of that, it's useful to understand the broad outlines of how a person's life has been, before you start arguing against their position or giving them unsolicited advice. If you understand their life, you might also learn if there have been any events that have been so impactful in their life that just arguing directly against their viewpoint will never convince them. But once you understand them, perhaps you can offer them alternative ways of meeting their needs, or perhaps you can suggest alternative ways to construct a society in which people do get their needs met. For example, suppose someone grew up in crippling poverty, and has certain very specific, very strong political opinions as a result. Then if you learn this, you may realize that this person will never agree to any way of structuring society in which the poor aren't helped, and indeed, wanting to help the poor is a noble desire. But in this case, perhaps you can have a productive discussion about what the most effective ways are of building a society in which everyone can have a good life, because there are several options here. And if, for example, you grew up in a well-off family and don't have everyone should be able to have a good life as a priority in your own mental construct of what an ideal society would be like, well, maybe you can reflect that if you had grown up in crippling poverty yourself, perhaps you would have different or at least slightly different opinions today. The previous example discussed a situation where someone's suffering was real, but perhaps their proposed societal solution wasn't optimal. Or perhaps it was. What can also be the case is that someone's suffering is real, but they misidentified the cause of their suffering. In the best case, you might be able to change someone's mind here, or at least plant seeds that will someday change someone's mind, but you can't make that argument without acknowledging that yes, they did have a very tough time. Because that is real. Obviously, these are just examples to illustrate how useful it can be to understand another person's life in broad strokes, before you try to argue against them or give them unsolicited advice. Sharing the broad outlines of your lives can also help create empathy and dismantle stereotypes. Now, it's possible that the other person will say that yes indeed, your views were shaped by the life you have had so far, but that they hold their own views because they're smart and good people, and have decided to adopt the one ideology that is true and virtuous. In this case, it may be best to just not have an argument with them. It's also possible that the other person will demand understanding and empathy, but will not be willing to give you understanding or empathy. In this case, it may be best to just not have an argument with them. Even if you win the argument, the world probably will not be a better place afterwards, because you will only have hardened them in their position. Unfortunately, productive arguments are rare, and sometimes the only winning move is to not have an argument at all. As Hakann said recently, Earth people are love-starved. So instead of arguing with them, you could also just listen to them and express love to them. If someone is unreasonable, showing them love can be very effective, if you have it in you. Or you can of course just take a walk in nature, with the other person or by yourself, or you can meditate, etc. I hope this helps. I love and deeply respect you, and I hope to physically meet some of you later this year. It's not guaranteed, it depends on the free will choices that Earth humans make, but it is likely. Your star brother, Hakann.